So again, I welcome you here. Oregon State University typically has events about the Holocaust, but it's also been the practice for the past 10 or 15 years to include events about other genocides, because the realization occurred to the organizers of the program that the Holocaust, as unique as it is not exceptional in the annals of the 20th century. And in the course of the past 10, 15 years, we've had speakers talk about Armenia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, even the experience of Native Americans in Oregon and California. And unfortunately, this has created a discipline, not at our university, but other universities, of comparative genocide. So it behooves us to talk about what has happened in the Middle East, and we have not had a program on the Middle East in these many years. Tonight's speaker, Sarhang Hamasaeed, is currently Director of Middle East Programs at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which he joined in February of 2011. If you're not familiar with the United States Institute of Peace, it was founded by Congress in 1984, thanks to legislation introduced by Oregon's famed senator and a World War II veteran, Mark Hatfield. Housed in Washington, D.C., the Institute provides training, analyses, and other resources to people, organizations, and governments working to build peace. Mr. Hamasaeed is especially well equipped for this task. He's a native of Sulaymaniyah, Iraq. He is a 2007 graduate of Duke University's Program in International Development Policy. Formerly, he worked for Kurdistan Save the Children, as well as the Los Angeles Times and other international media organizations. As Deputy Director General at the Council of Ministers of the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq, Mr. Hamasaeed managed strategic government modernization initiatives. At the USIP, his areas of focus include political and policy analysis, conflict analysis, dialogue processes, reconciliation, post-war stabilization, and ethnic and religious minorities. Tonight, our speaker will provide historical background to genocidal events that have occurred in Iraq and in Syria. Join me in welcoming Sarhang Hamasaeed.
Well, good evening. It's really an honor to be here before you today to speak about or part of the Holocaust Memorial Week. And I would like to thank Professor John Katz and the School of History, Philosophy and Religion, and the Oregon State University for this opportunity to be with you here tonight. The topic of genocide is something that I personally and passionately care about because what I will be talking about tonight is informed by my personal experience growing up and living in Iraq. And some of the things that I'll be sharing with you, I have experienced a version of it in person throughout my life there. And I will also be talking from the perspective of my work at the U.S. Institute of Peace, when John spoke about. And USIP, basically, at the Institute, we are working for a world with a vision of a world without violence. And we believe in the proposition that peace is possible, peace is practical, and it's important for U.S. and global security. And the way we try to achieve peace is by working with people, with organizations, with governments in the countries where we operate, by giving them the tools, the training, and enable them to lead the processes that will help them prevent violence and end them when conflicts turn violent. And we indeed, at the Institute of Peace, owe thanks to the state of Oregon and to the efforts of Senator Hatfield for being an early founder and champion for the creation of a national institution that cares about the national security, not from a perspective of hard power, but also from the perspective of soft power. And I would like to really commend the work of OSU of launching this program because the Holocaust, heinous crime, attracted the attention of the world, and a lot has been written. And I particularly commend the OSU's in their description about how other mass killings and genocide happened elsewhere in the world. And that is very, very true. Today's topic is about Iraq and Syria, and it's the wars in Iraq and Syria. When John asked me about speaking and about those wars, he did not specify which war. So I'm going to choose the war that I'll start with. In 1980, I was 4 years old when the Iraq-Iran broke out. It was an 8-year-long brutal war that cost an estimated 1 million lives and massive destruction. And while that war was happening, the Saddam Hussein, the then president of Iraq, his Ba'ath Party, and the Iraqi army have been suppressing the Iraqi people, mostly targeted their aim at the Sunnis of Iraq and the Shia of Iraq. They were treated as secondary citizens, torture, mass killings were used. By the time I was 11 years old, in 1987, Saddam and the Ba'ath Party had already embarked on a genocide operation called Anfal. Anfal is an Arabic word from the Quran that he borrowed and tried to give a religious connotation or cover for the killing of people. And in that operation, and Anfal means the spoils of war. And so by that point, the Kurds and the people that he killed were no longer secondary citizens. Actually, they were just treated as spoils of war. So in the Anfal genocide operations, by 1988, about 4,500 villages were destroyed, razed to the ground, including the village of my parents, about 10 miles away from where I lived. In that operation, over 180,000 people were taken to the middle and the south of Iraq to be found later in mass graves. Some of them, from the reports that we heard, were killed in chemical labs of the Iraqi army. And in that process, he also used chemical weapons and on different cities and villages. And what is known most internationally is the use of chemical weapons on the city of Halabja, in which in one attack he killed 5,000 people. So they were very difficult days. It felt like everything around me was falling apart. And it made me wonder, it made many other people wonder and ask, where is the international community from all of this killing? Where is humanity? Where is God from all of this? And these are questions that today in Iraq and Syria and Yemen, people are also asking. When these mass killings happen, what should be the response? How can we prevent it? So that's why the work of Oregon State University on the Holocaust and other mass killings is very important, so that we know and we learn from, okay, how do we get to these places? When we get there, how do we respond? How do we prevent that from happening again in the future? And as I talk about this, remembering the context of Iraq and Syria is very important. It's a region that has powerful countries like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, like Turkey. And You'll see in my conversation at the later stage about how do they come into this. And the title that OSU chose for this event is really fitting because what's happening is not just happening at the local level or at the national level, but it has implications for the region, and it has implications for the rest of the international community. And at the local level today in Iraq, or at the national level, when you look at Iraq and Syria, the terrorist organization ISIS is what comes to the news, and it overshadows everything else that is happening there. It's a terrorist organization that is known by other names: ISIL, Daesh, the Arabic acronym for that organization. And they do mass killings. They attack local communities. They do beheadings, and they are also among the actors who commit genocide and acts of genocide. These are older maps, and you will see the map are not current in here, and I've chosen those on purpose because this red area this is what the ISIS controlled in 2015, or it had a zone of influence. In 2014, it looked different. So look at the change. They were closer to the Iranian border. Now they are further from the Iranian border. Today, a current map will have them shrunk mostly to some parts of Mosul and mostly in Syria. Why did the reason I wanted to show an older map is that because that geographic red stain, that geographic part is important. Whenever ISIS went to community, the kind of killing that they have done, they had the strategy, they had tactics that they wanted to sow the seeds of division. In one of those attacks, they attacked the Yazidis, if you have heard of them. These are the minority groups living in the northwest of Iraq, in this area. They took 5,000 women into captivity, and they treat them as sex slaves. There are horrible stories of rape, of being sold, of selling those women and reselling them. And sometimes they include girls as young as 7 or 8 years old. And so if you talk to the Yazidis, they will count 70 plus accounts of genocide that happened in their history, and they definitely count this as one of them, because when ISIS attacked their villages, they bust the men and they killed them. They took the women and the girls as sex slaves. This kind of act is in one incident. It's planned for. It comes into in the context of the wars that before destroyed Iraq and created the conditions for an organization like ISIS to emerge. But what people do not know is that how cycles of violence get perpetuated. And ISIS as an organization, they have invested in tactics that is based on sowing the seeds of division and violence on which they survive. So another incident that happened in June 2014, as they took the area around Tikrit, they took a base that was called Camp Spiker. And in that in one day, they killed 1,700 Shia cadets. They were in civilian uniform, and they were the killings were recorded on video, and they were made publicly available. In those killings, ISIS used members of the local community from the local tribes, so that it appears it was the local tribes who killed Shia, and the local tribes were Sunni Muslims. So this is how they pitted one side versus another. And the rest, in the news, we hear about how sectarianism in the Middle East is going high, and how there are Sunni and Shia dynamics there. But in that context, so imagine this organization, this terrorist organization kills 1,700. They came from 90 tribes, from 20 tribes of Shia tribes and 9 provinces of the south of Iraq. The emotions were raging, and they wanted to go on revenge. They wanted to, the families of the victims wanted to join what is called the Popular Mobilization Forces, or as they are known as Shia militias. So that was on the Shia side, was mobilizing the youth to join those organizations to go and get justice through killing. And then it had the risk of pushing the Sunni population of Iraq more in the direction of ISIS. And that's the kind of fight that is very difficult when it breaks to stop. Something like that, the Iraqi army did not know how to respond to. It would have made the mission of the US-led coalition that is fighting ISIS extremely difficult. So as an organization, as the US Institute of Peace, we knew that we needed to act, and we need to act fast. We have, over the years, trained what is called the network of Iraqi facilitators, individuals who are coming from tribal backgrounds, from academic backgrounds, heading non-governmental organizations. Those individuals immediately made contact with the Sunni tribes in the Tikrit area, again, this is to remind you, and the Shia tribes of the south. We managed to lead a dialogue process that brought the different sides together. We ensured that the national government of Iraq was represented from the executive branch, the office of the prime minister, the relevant parliamentary committees, but also the representative of the Grand Shia cleric, Ali Sistani. So because religion could play a positive or a negative role. And in this instance, it was a positive role because it led to an agreement where the tribes did not go for revenge, where the tensions were reduced. And when Tikrit was liberated, and we started this 4 months before Tikrit was liberated from ISIS. After the liberation of Tikrit, the people of Tikrit did not want to go home because they were scared. There was news and stories about how the Shia militias will kill them. And the government did not know who to trust to allow back because every Sunni population, every member of the town was portrayed as you are either an ISIS collaborator or a member of ISIS. So trust was really, really low. But in the relationships that we built through the dialogue process, the Sunni tribes produced names that they guaranteed that they have no relationships with ISIS. The Iraqi government vetted those people, and they gradually allowed them to go back. And so the first batch of people that went home was about 400 families, about 1,200 people. And as someone who has been displaced twice in my life, I could tell you what it meant for those families to go home. The same process was repeated, and today about 382,000 people have returned to the province of Salah ad-Din, where the city of Tikrit is, and about 170,000 people have returned to the city of Tikrit itself, which is more than 90% of the population. So this is a site where genocide happened, and it had the potential to derail the conflict in Iraq in a direction that was going to go out of control. When you talk about how communities get radicalized, it's events like these that happen. It's terrorist organizations like ISIS that do these things. But in the context of Syria, it's a little bit different. More recently, we have seen in the news the use of chemical weapons by the regime, by the Assad regime, the government of Syria against its people. This was not the first incident. There were other times where this happened. And the US has responded by missile strikes on an airbase in Syria. But the bigger context, killings are happening on a daily basis. The Syrian conflict has, to date, has cost the lives of about 500,000 people. That's a huge cost. I mean, genocide could be something planned, an attack on a city, but what we see in Iraq and in Syria, they could be happening in episodes. It's not just one campaign that basically eradicates people. It could come in increments. And the international community, the region, gradually adjusts to those crimes. And Syria is an international failure and stalemate. And there are no good solutions to this. And we didn't get there all of a sudden. It was an incremental process that got there where we have very limited options to deal with today. The Syrian government is killing the people in different ways. There are aerial bombings. And today, there is probably one of the largest demographic changes that are being orchestrated in that part of the world. You have, in Syria, about half of the population displaced. We're talking about 12 million people. In Iraq, we have 3 million people displaced internally at the moment. That is about 15 million people. And if we look at the broader region, we could probably count about 20 million people who are refugees and displaced. So that is basically tearing society apart. And in Syria and Iraq, it was the fight that pushed people in certain directions. In Syria, it also started that way. It was the fighting that was causing displacement. Today, there's a massive engineering of population displacement and movement happening by the Syrian regime. They go and they bomb a locality and a city, and then they force them to surrender and then to be moved to other parts of the country. So when we're talking about the implication of violence, we're talking about displacement, we're talking about massive destruction. So this is Kobani, Syria, 2014. This is, sorry, the picture doesn't look great, but that is what the city that was liberated from ISIS. This is the city that you get back. This is Sinjar, Iraq. This is where the Yazidis live. This is Ramadi, Iraq. This is what you get back. The estimates of 18% destruction in the city. This is Mosul, Iraq. The fighting continues to happen. This is east of Damascus in Syria. Aleppo, Syria. So when we talk about genocide, in the case of the Holocaust, in the case of Anfal that I spoke about, in the case of the Yazidis, there are methodical things that are happening. But the way I look, as I reflect on this conflict, there is another layer of genocide that has taken a life of its own as a result of the different conflicts happening at the same time. So it's causing massive destruction. In all these places, what ISIS is doing is also leaving improvised explosive devices, or there are a lot of unexploded ordnance that make it extremely difficult to clean those places. When you see kids like this, there are families, there are kids, there are individuals who are killed on a daily basis as they have gotten tired of being displaced for so long. They just want to go home to the plot of land on which they lived, even on the rubble of what you lived. I have lived as a refugee and as a displaced person. I know at some point you want the dignity of being out of the conditions of displacement, where you cannot find food, when you cannot find shelter, when you cannot find help, when you're out of a job. So these people, under that pressure, they go home, they go to conditions like that. So the implication, when we talk about the national implications of this, these people are extremely vulnerable to being recruited by terrorist organizations like ISIS, or the dozens of armed groups that have formed in fighting ISIS or advancing the interests of different political parties. So continued fight, massive destruction, displacement. And what, again, the physical destruction and the immediate effect of the fight is felt. What is not also seen by the international media is that, okay, how did this fight create self-censorship and isolation with those communities? This is a picture of Tus-Hurmatu, which is north of Baghdad in Iraq. These are what the communities have done themselves. They blocked their streets. This is a city that has a mixed population of Kurds, of Arabs, of Sunnis and Shia and other minorities. So that they prevent friction and fighting, they just block the interaction themselves. So when there is not the physical destruction, the social tensions have gotten to a stage where the community is imposing those red lines. So my concern as I look at this process is, if these problems are unaddressed, it will give us the foundation for more violence to come, either ISIS re-emerging under a different name. Today they are on the run, they're pushed back. Most of the red area that I showed you earlier has been, on the Iraq side, most of this has been liberated. But the destruction that I show is what you get back. The displacement is what you get back. And we have the problem and the potential of violence breaking out, and those people to be closer into to radicalization out of a need, because there are no alternatives. We hear a lot about ISIS, but what we don't hear more about as much about is Al-Qaeda and what happened to Al-Qaeda. As ISIS was globalizing and was reaching to other parts of the world, Al-Qaeda was localizing. In Syria, they have formed coalitions and they have attracted members of the society to their ranks. In Yemen, they are doing the same thing. And they are appealing to the local population. When you have the regime of Assad bombing you, when you have the international community from their perspective, from the perspective of people not caring about you, and you have only one protector, which is Jabhat al-Nusra, or now it's called Jabhat Tahrir al-Sham, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. These are becoming the voices of the people, and these are the organizations that dominate what's happening on the ground. These may seem as people as unable to determine their destiny or forge a different future. But that will be a limited view on what's happening. If you are someone born into that kind of destruction, your path of life is shaped and determined by the circumstances that happens around you. Now that I have the honor and the pleasure of living here since 2009, I can see the contrast. When somebody is born here in the United States, there's already a social contract called the Constitution. There is a law, there is courts, there's police, there is a system that will protect you in a certain way. When you are born in that context, when you are surrounded by armed groups, by terrorist organizations, your prospects is extremely difficult. And if that cycle of violence is not broken, the consequences down the road will be greater. And with that, let me move to the regional aspect of this and quickly touch upon this. I showed you earlier in the map the powerful countries. In Iraq, in Syria, what you have is a proxy war. This is where, especially in Syria, you have Iran and Turkey having a significant role in the fight there. It's no longer a Syrian fight. It's no longer Assad regime versus the Syrian people. You have powerful regional actors fighting each other through a proxy war. And then add to that now, you have the US-Russia relationship and tensions playing a role in Syria. These powers have taken the context of the fight out of the local level, out of the national level, and into, if the Syrians want to stop that fight, it will not be their call alone to stop that fight. There are other actors making the call there. And the international implication is great. You may recall the incident where Turkey shot down a Russian plane. So that's NATO going against Russia, and there was a danger there. And as a result of the U.S. Airstrikes, there is a deconfliction mechanism where Russia and the United States try to avoid for their planes to go into a fight in the skies of Syria. Russia suspended that, and now it has been resumed. But incidents like that, as the actors fight in that context, there is a danger of those forces going against each other and turning into an open conflict. I mean, there is more that I can talk about, and I'll leave probably some of that into for a discussion, because I would like to engage with you in a discussion more than just a presentation. But let me leave with one other thought, which is a hopeful note. When I spoke about the Spiker story and the massacre and how we prevented this from turning into a bigger fight, there was Iraqis stepping up to the table. These are the facilitators that we trained and are leading the discussion among the tribes that prevented that massacre. There are people who are putting their lives in danger to have a different outcome. They are called the civil society of Iraq, the non-governmental leaders of Iraq. This is one of the best investments that the United States and the international community has done in Iraq, and they have done some in Syria. In Syria, it's more complicated. It doesn't show. But in Iraq, I spoke more about Iraq because it has a better framework to discuss options, to discuss practical steps. Happy to discuss Syria more in the questions and answers, but the options are extremely more limited. The other thing that I want to, and this is another picture of the dialogues that brought the different tribes together. This is a picture of the people going home. It's this picture. This today is Iraq's problem, but also Iraq's hope. Why? This is Iraq's problem because these are angry people who are taking to the street, who demand jobs, demand reform, demand change, while the government of Iraq is fighting a war with ISIS, while it is trying to manage 3 million internally displaced people, while it is trying to reconstruct the destroyed areas, while it is trying to stay afloat and pay public servants salary, because Iraq's economy has taken a huge hit. It's over 90% reliant on oil, and oil prices have been halved since this conflict started. They are unable to cover. And when you have people taking to the street in the stable provinces, this is yet another problem to have. But for me, this is also a reason for hope. And why I say that? Growing up in Iraq, as I spoke to you about the Anfal operations, Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government, probably in 1980, the world may have seemed beyond Iraq's borders. But by early 1980s, and when the Iran-Iraq war started, my world, the world of other Iraqis, shrunk to within the borders of Iraq. As Saddam applied those policies, that world shrunk into the cities where I lived, or other people lived. As it progressed to the mid-1990s, it was dangerous to get out of your neighborhood. It gradually became dangerous to even think. The saying was going, be careful, the walls have ears. Saddam did not leave you there. He tried, in the Ba'ath Party, tried to come back and control you. You were confined to the boundaries of your brain. And even there, he did not leave you. Even the thought he wanted to control. And his mechanism into doing that, the next day, a kid would go to school. The teacher would ask, I'm talking about primary school, a teacher working for the Ba'ath Party could ask that child, what were your parents watching last night? at 9 p.m. And if the answer was not the speech of Saddam Hussein, that could have gotten your family into trouble. No, something that the students would do, no student, no teacher would dare to give a 0 mark to the answer of a question, whether it was in math or science or the topic, when a student would write, a lazy student would not know the answer, would write Saddam Hussein as an answer to that question. Imagine, that was the level of fear that was applied into that society. And when you paralyze society like that, it creates vacuums that gives you terrorist organizations, that gives you the kind of horror that we have in the Iraq and Syria war. The picture in Syria was not significantly different. Genocide was spoken about at a mass scale in Iraq in 1988. In Syria, we are talking about that. So there's a time gap where Saddam was in power. Now Assad is in power. And now Assad is doing similar things to that what Saddam is doing. So yes, the Holocaust happened. Yes, Anfal happened. But genocide continues. So there is really work that needs to be done. And if I get back to the picture, why is this hope? To me, is where you measured, at the level you measure change. This is the Iraqi people getting out of their heads, getting out of their homes, getting out of their neighborhoods, going to the public squares and demanding change. The fear that Saddam Hussein instilled, that the Ba'ath Party instilled, it means it's broken. These people want a different life. They want a better life. And they are trying to do it peacefully through nonviolent means. And in Syria, members of the civil society organizations, the Syrian revolution started as a civilian revolution, people taking to the street and asking their government for change through nonviolent means. It was the Assad regime that changed it into a violent one. The people of Syria do not want war, do not want violence. It was imposed on them. And now it has gotten out of control by the regional and international actors. The week, for those who remember in the media, the week or the day when President Obama said that he will, Assad has passed a red line and for using chemical weapons. And there was I was in Lebanon, and you could feel even in the effect of that statement from the President of the United States, the effect of that statement, that the whole region was adjusting, said, okay, America is going to impose that red line, is going to impose on Assad and penalize Assad for using chemical weapons and committing an act of genocide, of mass killing. That effect, I did not know what happened inside Syria, but from the civil society organizations that I've spoken with, that week when the prospect of a strike was so real, there was no attack, zero attack from the Assad regime. This was the week where killings stopped by the Assad regime because they were afraid that they will be held accountable somehow. So the role and the word of the United States could be very, very powerful. I know that red line has been criticized in so many ways because it was not enforced. There are concerns about, okay, why should we be involved in problems of elsewhere? These are all legitimate questions, but I'm talking about the role and the power of what the United States, the words of the United States could do. One other thing, when about a year and a half ago, there was a call, there was an attempt at ceasefire and to bring a closure to the fight. The first thing that the Syrian people did after the barrel bombs from the Syrian planes stopped, they went back to the street and demonstrated peacefully, not fired. They demonstrated peacefully and said, we want this regime to go. We want this dictator to go. So that is the thirst of the people. But it has to be worked at it practically. What I described to you on the local level of those people risking their lives to prevent local violence, the bigger scale of it it requires bigger action from the international community, because these people are overpowered by more powerful actors. And it's those people who go to the street, the civil society, the people who take their lives, to put their lives in danger and try to have a different outcome, give me hope. And I think there is a path for hope, but yes, things are very difficult. And I would like to pause here and happy to take questions.